What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Reel Me In, a movie podcast, where you didn't really ask for it, but hey, we're going to give it to you anyways. This is a podcast where we talk about anything, everything, and, well, anything about movies. I'm one of your co-hosts, Chase Lee, and hey guys, listen, if you're searching on the internet for another movie podcast, or you're not really sure which podcast you should listen to, and you are a movie fan, well, welcome to our house, our Reel Me In house. It's a nice little community here. We all love movies. We're all passionate about them, and we hope that you can be passionate with us and join the conversation because we love talking about them. If you're new to the show, welcome once again. If you're a returning listener, what we typically do, we'll go over some movie news, some trailers, and we'll talk about the movies that come out each weekend and, of course, box office results for the weekend. But that is not the case for this week. We're going to be mixing it up a little bit, and Joel will introduce all that. But this is episode 230. We're just climbing up there in the numbers. And before I introduce my co-host over there, please share this podcast around and let people know this is the definitive movie podcast where you get all your little tidbits, info, and wonderful, delightful, and delicious commentary. So speaking of the co-host over there, Joel, how are we doing this week? And usually when I ask you this, I hardly ever see you during the week. This is one of those rare cases where I saw you all damn week. So would you like to tell the people out there what's it like living with me, and, waking up with me and, just eating together and just spending a lot of, romantic time together and watching a bunch of movies?
It was beautiful.
It was.
And also,
it was very
terrifying. And also, I'm just kidding.
Well, don't tell them the terrifying part. Just tell them it was beautiful and we can move on.
No, it was a lot of fun. I've stayed over your place before, never for 4 days, but it was a really fun, exhausting, but in a good way week, kind of.
Well, I mean, that's really funny, Joel. Like, you stayed over for a week. What did we do, and what is this week's episode?
Yeah, so this week the Dallas International Film Festival played out. Now, it was properly from the 3rd to the 10th, but the 10th. But we did kind of a few days of it. You did more days than I did overall. I think only one more day, right?
Yes.
You did Saturday. I did Friday. And so it was a lot of fun. So basically, it's gonna be kind of a similar feel to Chase's previous ones, except that there's gonna be two people. We're just gonna go through day by day. I'm gonna start with, because I did the first day, and I also did a couple of movies before the festival on Screener. So, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
I've never done anything like this before. So,
well, I mean, that's a beautiful segue, because let's go ahead and get into kind of just the overall festival, what you thought about it, what you didn't like about it. Can you not wait for next year? Joel, I guess we'll go to you, since many of our beautiful listeners, they've already listened to me yap around the film festival. Now that I have someone on, and this was kind of your first full blown out let's do several movies a day type of festival. What was it like for you? And what were some of the highlights and kind of low points? And would you do it again next year?
Oh, I definitely do it again next year. I have done several movies a day at a festival. I haven't done several movies a day in a row. So there were 2 days where we did 2 one day and 3 the next day. And, of course, I had to write about them because I do the written part of the reviews on DallasMovieScreenings.com. So that was new because I hadn't done that kind of thing before. I've gone to the festival several times. The first time was actually way back in 2008 when it was still the AFI Dallas Film Festival. It was the same. It was kind of the same. Some of the same people. Pretty sure that James Faust was involved back then. I could be wrong about that. I think I saw him, but there were other people like film critics from the Dallas area that were involved. Robert Wolanski, and I saw a couple of movies. I saw The Forbidden Kingdom, which is that Jet Li Jackie Chan movie, and then I saw Snow Angel. No, not Snow Angels. I saw that one later on. Son of Rambo, and those are the two that I saw at that. But then a few years later in 2012, I pretty much went kind of semi-regularly every other day, I think, or pretty much any day that I had off. I didn't take off because at that point I was working for the city of Plano, and I just kind of went to movies in the evening. and then and on the weekend. So I've done it before, but I haven't done it in this manner where I've had to write reviews, kind of come out of them. That's why we ended up taking one day off that we were originally going to do because of, well, we'll get to it, but our Sunday basically.
Yeah, we had to have a day of rest, and
Yeah.
and not only because we were physically tired, it was also mentally draining. Not for Joel's sake, where he has to write, and I'm not gonna lie, I do have it easier. I do video reviews, but it's also mentally challenging because you're seeing so much content and you're trying to absorb everything. And most of the movies we saw this year were great, so it's like there was just a great movie after great movie, and we had to really kind of separate all of them,
sort through all of it in your head. And what's kind of what can be the downside to a film festival, and I'm just going to be honest about this, is the fact that there very much is an echo chamber quality to it, because unless you have somebody else to bounce off of like we did, each other, if you're doing this alone, I can imagine that it's a lot. Like if you're just covering it alone, you don't have any colleagues with you or whatever, for an outlet, you schedule it to to the degree that you can't bounce off of anybody else because you're just running from screening to screening. I can imagine that would be exhausting in a not good way. You're seeing a lot of great movies, but you're also having to write about them, but you don't have the outlet of somebody else to talk to. That's why it's such a great communal experience, and that's why I think that if you're going to do that for an outlet, at least ask to have somebody else go with you or something.
Well, that's what was so great about seeing all these movies together. Well, most of them together, is that after the movie, I was confused on something, or if you were confused on something, we would talk it out and be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's the feeling I was leaning towards. Because there was a couple of these that I didn't know how to feel, and talking to Joel and kind of just hearing him talk about it, and I go, yeah, that's pretty much how I felt about it. I couldn't really word it into a sentence, so that's why it's nice to talk about it with people. But yeah, I thought, believe it or not, this is one of the strongest Dallas film festivals I've been to. This is my fifth one I've been to, and I'm just telling you a foreshadow right now. Out of the 13 movies that we saw, only one of them was like atrocious. That's just how strong this year was, and so I really hope with the years going forward, James and the rest of the people on the team, they just continue to knock it out of the park. And so I guess to hype that up even more, let's bleed right into it. So Joel, you actually got to start out on the very first day. What did you see? And I guess talk about your experience on your first day.
Yeah, so, well, before I get to that, there were...
you had a couple screeners.
Yeah, I had a couple of screeners. They didn't do a lot of screeners this year. Sometimes, with film festival, they'll put one out, but they'll put a bunch of them out like last year. They did that, so I was able to write from home. But they didn't really do that much this year, but I did get a chance to see two movies. The first one was a movie called Edge of the World, which came from director Randy Redroad. This one was in the family-friendly selection. I think it was filmed in Texas. It's kind of or somewhere in the South. I don't know if I think it is Texas though. And it was about this group home of kids at risk because of issues involving their parents, various ones, and about this coach who kind of inspires them through cross-country track, and it's primarily faith-based. It's not as like sanctimonious as the God's Not Dead movies or anything, but it was pretty bad, honestly. It was this director's third movie. I haven't seen the other two. They were called The Doughboy from way back in 2001, and then Among Ravens from a couple years ago that had Amy Smart in it. This one doesn't have many big names. Richard T. Jones is somebody that people would recognize if they've seen, I think, Tyler Perry movies and stuff like the T.D. Jakes movie thing, kind of that arena. He does a lot of mainstream black entertainment movies, and he has a role in here, and he's probably the best actor in the movie. But basically, the problem with the movie is that in a certain way, there is a sanctimonious quality because all of these kids have problems that they've inherited from their parents, and so the movie has this weird, like, judgmental quality toward all of the kids as if they're the ones with the problems and they need to fix them. And so it's just a weird experience. It's very short, so it thankfully isn't longer, but it's imprecisely performed. It's especially by the kids. I hate beating up on kids, but we've seen enough good kid actors, including at least a couple in this film festival, that are good enough that you can pretty much pick out the ones that are not putting their heart into it. And here it's just one very very flat performance after another from the kids. And so that one, it's not as bad as the one that you mentioned, but it's pretty bad. It was definitely the second worst that I saw. And so yeah, I would give Edge of the World a D plus. Not great. So I don't know when it comes out. It's not even listed on Letterboxd at this point, which is pretty significant. I believe that it's only played at festivals, but if anybody sees it coming around the bend, definitely kind of avoid it, honestly, because it was not great. And then and also I will say, like, Richard T. Jones was good. He plays the chaplain of the group home, and then Trevor St. John is the main character. He's the cross country coach, and he's solid. Not a great performance or anything, but he's solid enough. It's just one of those things where it kind of shoots itself in the foot repeatedly with its message and its performances, and if the filmmaking is barely above like one of those commercials for like those Ford commercials have that specific look to them. That's what this movie looked like to me. It just wasn't great. So that was the first one that I saw like several weeks ago. I've honestly forgotten a lot of it, but yeah, that one I'd give a D plus. And then the second one was this movie called Life is a Bitch, which was in the Latin competition, and it was from, I'm gonna pull it up here. It was from director Julia Resende, and this one basically follows a quattro of people who are trying to kidnap a millionaire, and so they kind of put all this stuff in motion, but they completely unanticipate almost everything about this job, both what it entails, logistically, and also kind of their own ambitions in the crime. And for a while, it's really strong, but what happens is it kind of exhausts itself eventually. It plays out the central idea within about maybe 75 to 80 minutes, and then it goes on for another 20, and by that point it was kind of hard to care. And then when it ends, there's this big quote unquote twist, and it kind of reminded me of Burn After Reading in a way, but not as formally interesting, certainly not as just not as interesting as that movie was. And so the performances are good, but it just exhausts itself. And so yeah, I give that one a C plus. It's also called Como é Cruel Viver Assim. It's from Brazil. So anyway, if you see that, it could obviously do worse in it. I suspect that there will be people who are bigger fans than I was. And it's a near miss, but I don't think it quite comes together at the end. And then, yeah, so that was pretty much those were the two that I saw before the festival started. And then, because I agreed to review them. And then the first day, the first movie I saw on the first day of the official festival, or the second day, my first day of the official festival, was one that I didn't end up reviewing for the website. Somebody else did, but it was called The Guilty. And this one, man, I wanted it to work so badly, and it actually worked for a while. But it's basically this very compact thriller about an emergency services operator named oh man, I forgot his name. Asker. And it's from director I think he's like Jonas. Crap, I should probably have these open, but the guilty Gustav Muller, who basically weaves this tale of an alarm dispatcher who gets a call from a kidnapped woman inside a van, and so he tries to help her, and it's essentially kind of like The Call from several years ago, the Halle Berry movie where she's trying to save Abigail Breslin. But it kind of mixes The Call, the concept, with the style of that movie Luck from a few years ago with Tom Hardy, where and it's because almost all of the entire movie just features Asker's face. And so it pretty much entirely relies on the main actor, Jakob Settergren, who is really good in this role. And it's an intense story, but sort of like the other, that previous movie that I talked about, it basically kind of runs its course at about the 40-minute mark, and it's 85 minutes. And so, it kind of takes some really silly turns at the end, and I think that it kind of betrays the intensity of the early moments by just piling on, a few twists, kind of one too many, honestly. And, tries to fit in this kind of character study about Asker himself, about how he's like coming up on a court date because he was involved in a horrible crime himself, and so he's trying to figure out this crime as one last good deed, but he takes it way too far and in various different places, and I won't reveal how that happens, but yeah, it just kind of falls apart because what happens is it runs its course well before it ends, and the goodwill, from Settergren's performance kind of runs out too. And so that one is also a C+. It's a very near miss. So I kind of got three of the disappointing ones out of the way at first, and then from that point on, it was pretty much, except for one movie, it was pretty much one good or great movie after that. And starting with Dark Money, which I saw on Friday night. And I know you'll get to that one in a minute, but Dark Money is a documentary from director Kimberly Reed, who is kind of an up and comer. She's been involved in documentary filmmaking for a while, but this is the first thing I've seen her direct. And this one is basically an examination of the presence of corporate money in elections and their influence on elected officials. And so specifically takes on, like groups like American Tradition Partnership, and because it primarily takes place in Montana, Montanans for Right to Work, I think that's what it's called. And then Citizens United, which everybody should know about. They're the ones that are the pox on the country. They're run by the Koch brothers. And so this one kind of examines a lot of that influence in the elections, but it also doesn't just do that, to where, for me, kind of what summed it up in the best way was a narrative point early on when we get a portrait of this city in Montana. I think it's Butte, Montana, where this thing called the Berkeley Pit is formed. And the Berkeley Pit is part of a copper mine, or an old copper mine that has since been terribly, terribly ruined by the copper that has, leaked into the water, so that the water is as acidic as vinegar. It's still water. It's not vinegar, but it's as acidic as vinegar. And it's famous for having killed, in 1995, I think, like 342 birds. And then, like 20 years later, 10,000 snow geese. And so you get this, like, and the reason that it got there is because of corporate money. The fact that they wanted to push back against regulations, which is a big part of this movie. And, getting personal for a second, I don't like to get really political on the show, but I am left-leaning, and a big thing for me is regulations. If I would never actually run for office, but if I were to run for office, a big platform of mine would be regulations. I think that they're important. Obviously, there's overreach in those. There's overreach in anything that you have, but sensible regulations should exist in every structure. And this is all about the pushback against people who want to remove those boundaries, and it strikes to the heart of part of me, honestly. And so this one was pretty effective. It's not some outstanding documentary. It's a very traditional style, lots of talking heads, lots of archival footage, paired with that. And but it's a solid piece of work. It's the website right here. I'm on the film guide, and it describes it as a political thriller, and that's pretty true. It's one of those things that raises your blood pressure. When in terms of the tension and in terms of the details that you learn, it's all about shocking you with various stories. And we get some pretty head scratching ones here, where the influence to try to get some people elected actually ends up alienating the people trying to get elected with the people that are trying to elect them. So you have this group who is running a benefit for I believe a GOP House representative or something like that, state representative. And because he did not back their cause, they don't invite him to the thing that is about him. And so you get a little bit of a chuckle of wow, that actually happens. And it's just like this wide-ranging, series of messages about, just money is corruptive, and it is just, we need to get it out of. This is part of the regulation thing. We need to get it out of politics. Otherwise, you have stuff like this happening, and dark money corporations being formed, and it's a really interesting documentary. And so yeah, I would give that one a solid B. And I'm pretty sure that we're on the same track, because that bleeds into your first day, as this was the first one that you saw.
Yeah, no, it's a great segue, because we pretty much agree on how we feel about that one. Because when we get further into this festival, you guys are going to realize there are some fantastic documentaries that were displayed at this festival. I'm about to talk about one after this one, but this one was a solid approach. Now, what's interesting about this festival is that Joel and I are going to have great documentaries that we saw, solid ones, and bad ones. And you're going to be able to tell the difference as we talk about it. But I think what Dark Money did was it accomplished its goal, which was to expose this kind of corruption and just this dirty money laundering that happens within politics, and how people that are in the top 1% in our country wealth-wise are the ones controlling all of our elections and manipulating people. And it's just sick, man. I absolutely hate watching stuff like this. I'm fascinated by it, but I hate watching it because I just get so angry, because people are sheep and they can't think for themselves and do research, and they just blindly follow whatever, and it's irritating. But Dark Money appropriately did what it wanted to do. That's a solid look into the corruption in Dark Money. Oddly enough, when I saw it, and I was telling Joel this, I don't know if this was because of the subject matter, or if people wanted to hate watch something because they know there's not corruption in politics, or they wanted to watch it to reaffirm their positions in corruption. I don't know, but most of the audience that I saw was old people, like elderly, kind of retired people, and I'm like, that's really weird, because like I said, they could have just been hate watching it and be like, there is no corruption in politics, MAGA, all that stuff, yada yada yada. Or they could have been like, oh, I've been following this for decades. I'm so glad there's a movie being exposed on this stuff. So I have no clue what they were thinking, but I found that kind of interesting that I was one of the youngest people in the audience, and that was the first movie I watched that day. And I did 4 of them this day, because I met up with Joel on Sunday. So Saturday was all me by myself, and I couldn't talk about any of these to anyone. So it was very weird to just walk out of each movie, like Joel said, and just kind of put your head down and go wait in the other line. All right, so Dark Knight was the first one. The second one was Won't You Be My Neighbor? And yes, this is the Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers documentary that I have been seeing a trailer for every single movie that I've seen at the Alamo Draft House for like the past 3 months, including Avengers Infinity War, which is really cool, by the way, because, hey, let's get this in front of as many eyeballs as possible. So this one is, hold on here, directed by Morgan Neville, and like I said, this is kind of showcasing Fred Rogers, his whole mission with the show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and what he wanted to do for children's entertainment, which was, yes, entertain them, but also have some substance and teach them about real-life issues, but do it in a more approachable manner for kids so they can kind of absorb it better. Because there is a difference. He didn't want to just sit there and, talk to a camera and talk to kids about, like divorce or assassination or the Vietnam War, like some of the episodes in his catalog were. He wanted to incorporate like puppets and, sets and colors and really kind of draw them in and then lay down the real life stuff on them. And, that's kind of what this whole documentary is kind of based on, was the whole mission behind the show and just seeing how the show evolved through different eras, whether it be the Vietnam War or when Bobby Kennedy got assassinated, or, racial discrimination. Like one of the members that was on the show played an officer, and he was a black gentleman. And during this time, there were, white punk ass idiots putting like chemicals into pools to scare out black people. And it's like, while they were in the pool, by the way. And so one of these scenes in the documentaries, they would show like old footage of people being a-holes and, putting chemicals into pools while people are in them. And what Mr. Rogers did was invite that cast member to come on, and they would put their feet like in a little kiddie pool, and he'd be like, hey, you want to wash your feet with me? So it was just subtle stuff like that, to where he wasn't making a statement blatantly, he was making a statement subtly, and it was almost like this subtle slap into the face of discrimination and bigotry. And I found that to be quite just powerful, the fact that he had that influence on kids and really could shape their minds into being tolerant and not being, hateful a-holes. And so that's the thing with documentaries, is that I always appreciate showing the flaws in people and the good. Fred Rogers was like 99% a saint, so it's kind of hard to kind of pinpoint anything bad about him, but he did have some missteps where that black actor that's on his show, like I mentioned before, was gay in real life. And so he was caught going to a gay bar, and Fred approached him and said, could you not go into that bar again? We're going to lose some sponsors if they see you. And of course, this guy was taken back, and he was like, oh, but Fred's like loving, he loves everyone. And towards his last days of living, Fred approached him and said, I shouldn't have said what I said because I know that sounds bad, but I just want to let you know that I love you just the way you are. And that got to him. And so even when he had a couple of missteps, he still kind of evolved, and he grew to love people, even if it went against his ideology, because he was actually set up to be a reverend. And so he went into television instead, and that's why he's got those ideologies underneath him. But even then, he still evolved and grew, and I think a lot of people that are, especially like racists and all that stuff, can learn from that, that even if you may not care for a particular group of people and all that stuff, like, you can grow and evolve, and maybe you can get like some of that hate out of you and stuff, and that's kind of like what he did. And it was just a wonderful documentary about a wonderful person that really did change the way of children's programming, and I enjoyed it quite thoroughly. I love the music. All the interviewees were shot really well. It was just a nice, clean documentary with some really great archival footage of not only the show but real life events, and I liked it quite a bit. I typically don't like say what the audience was like unless it really was like important, but it kind of was. And I told Joel this, and when I was sitting in Won't You Be My Neighbor, there was this kid that sat next to me, and he was about, I'd say like 90% blind. He could still look at his phone through like enlarged text. And before the movie started, they asked us in the audience, like, who grew up with Mr. Rogers, who watched him. And of course, I raised my hand because I was born in 1990. I still remember watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Arthur on PBS as a kid. And this kid didn't raise his hand. So obviously he was younger than me. I think he was like 12 or maybe 13. I have no clue. Kids nowadays look normal. When I was growing up, I looked like a monster truck, and I would have been 13. And so people were confused, like, are you an adult yet? Are you in college? I'm like, no, I'm not. But no, what I found really kind of potent about Fred Rogers is that even if you didn't grow up with him, he could still affect you. Like, this kid was crying. Like, I think it was just the overwhelming swell of the music, and just hearing Fred Rogers' voice really got to him, and just kind of like the overall like positive messages that he kind of threw out, and that, you know, it touched me to see this kid being affected by it that way, and it just goes to show you that even if you don't know this man, he can still make a difference in your life. So I would have. I gave this one a solid A. I think it's a fantastic documentary. If you have been a fan of him or not, please go check it out. But I know that Joel was raising his fists in anger because I know he really wanted to see that one. This next movie that I saw, not so much. It is what it is. And this one's called Woman Walks Ahead, and it's from A24. Yes, and DirecTV. No. Sorry. It's directed by Susanna White, and this one tells the story of Jessica Chastain, who plays Catherine Weldon, who goes to Dakota. I believe it's South Dakota, and she tries to paint a chief known to his tribe by Sitting Bull, and she wants to kind of paint a picture of him and kind of preserve history, because at this point in time, this is when there's not that many tribes left, and of course, we as dumb white people, Joel, as you know this in our history, we love to take over land and do a bunch of terrible things, and so she wanted to kind of preserve the last remaining people within that community, to really kind of preserve that history, so people know that tribes like this existed and they were taken over by awful people. So I was looking forward to it just because A24, I want to see them do anything that they pump out, even if they are associated with DirecTV. And I like Jessica Chastain. I thought the movie was fine. I thought it had some editing issues, whether it be how people reacted or just the overall pace of the movie or just the overall impact. It just, I don't know, it felt kind of like a first draft type of cut. I don't know, I didn't really care for the actual flow of it. I thought the cinematography was quite nice. It was, vibrant, beautiful, almost painting like composition, and I always adore that in westerns. I thought the performances were quite good. Jessica Chastain was really great. I've always liked her. I don't know why people have issues with her, and if it's because of her, stuff that she does outside the movies, that's not relevant. It's how she acts in the movie, and she does a pretty great job. Sam Rockwell is great, and he was coming off of his Oscar win, but I thought he was extremely underused. Especially when you are using someone of that caliber, because I do think he's the best one in the entire cast in terms of talent, but definitely underused. And then the gentleman that plays Sitting Bull is Michael Greyeyes, and he does a wonderful job. Like, I actually felt like he was this really strong leader that was just doing best for his tribe and doing best for Jessica Chastain and protecting her, and I really felt like he was the actual heart and soul of the movie, and I really did like his performance quite a bit. I need to watch more stuff with him in it. But I just think overall, the history of the story is really great because I love anything historical or it's based on history. But I found the movie to be quite lacking in emotion and the overall pace, and like I said, the editing. It just felt okay at best, and it didn't really have that punch I wanted it to have. There were a couple scenes that had that kind of like kind of right hook to the jaw, if you will, but it just wasn't enough. So I'll give Woman Walks Ahead because I like the performances and the cinematography a C+. That's as far as I'll go with it. I don't want to watch it again, to be honest with you. And the last one, speaking of A24, we are back once again. I did a back-to-back A24 screening here. And then I saw, the last one I saw for the day was First Reformed. This one stars Ethan Hawke, Amanda Seyfried, Joel, Cedric Kyles. I was like saying his real name. Anyways, this one is written and directed by Paul Schrader, and the best way I can describe this movie to you guys is that Ethan Hawke plays this grieving pastor who drinks. He has lost a son. His wife may or may not be in the picture. He's just a lonely guy that's trying to figure out where his purpose in life is, and whether he's the right guy to give other people advice when he's got a lot of problems himself. It's going to be one of those movies that's going to be character driven and really kind of focus on self-reflection and certain philosophies in life, and just realize what's important and how you just kind of go about this crazy world. And I love this one. It is, I will say, to give you guys a warning and a heads up, if you are an A24 fan, I am too, but this movie is slow. And I don't want people to be turned off by that, because this movie doesn't really get going until like 20 minutes in. Like, it takes its sweet-ass time, to put it lightly. I don't mind that, because I was actually glued to every single frame of this movie, and here's why. I was glued to it because Ethan Hawke's performance was so magnetic and just so kind of in your face, but also reserved in a way to where I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was just that powerful, and the dialogue that he was, speaking from, Paul Schrader's script, which, by the way, if you don't know who this gentleman is, he has written and co-written two of the best movies in history. He wrote Taxi Driver, and he co-wrote Raging Bull, which is one of the best boxing movies, if not the best boxing movie ever. So this guy has some clout, right? In the past couple years, he has kind of stumbled a little bit with reviews and whatnot, especially from his last two Nicolas Cage movies. But this one, he's back in full form. I thought the script was really kind of sharp and dynamic, and really kind of exploring different ideologies, and really kind of focusing on Ethan Hawke's character and showing that depth that we need in this type of movie, since, like I told you guys, this relies on character reflection. I love the side characters like Amanda Seyfried and even Cedric Kyles, who plays like this Joel Osteen type of pastor, where he is a pastor of like a really large mega church, and Ethan Hawke is at one of those kind of like small, kind of quaint churches that's kind of falling down and stuff. And it's just, kind of ironic that the pastor in the mega church is the immoral one, and the one that's in the crappy looking one that no one goes to is actually the better man, and yet he's the one that's got the most problems. It's a really fascinating contrast. I like all that, right? And the cinematography is beautiful. It's crisp. It lingers on shots, and Paul wants you to know that. He wants you to feel uncomfortable in some scenes, feel the emotions in other scenes. That's what's really great about the kind of slow pace in the cinematography, is that you were forced to pay attention to the dialogue and the characters, and that's really well done. However, the one thing I didn't really care about this movie, and I'm wondering if Joel will have the same kind of hesitations as I am, but there is, without spoiling, there is an antagonist, and it's not just Cedric Kyles. I will say that I don't think it's really Cedric's performance and character. It's more of everyone else that's a part of the antagonist circle. It felt a little too like ham-fisted, where I don't want to spoil what they're talking about, but I will just say that, you know, the people out there that had like the complaints of Avatar like really hitting you over the head with its environmental messages? Let's just say that kind of applies here, and I thought it was a little too cheesy, and I thought the villains and the antagonists were like almost borderline like mustache twirlers, and I got their, you know, evil intents and stuff, and, you know, I got what they were doing because they were corrupt and all that stuff, yada, yada, yada. That's not the problem. I think it was just the fact that when they announced what they were doing and, like, they started talking about it compared to everything else in the movie, it just seemed a little too, like I said, almost like Inspector Gadget, like Dr. Claw type of villainry, and I don't know. I could watch it again and change my mind, but that's honestly my only hang-up. I think everything else works about this movie. Funny story, since we are talking about our festival experiences. We were watching the movie, and the projector stops about halfway in between, and it took about 2 minutes to reboot. And this is no lie. You guys have no idea what the end of the movie is or the context or anything, but I will tell you this. The end of the movie also stopped, like, abruptly, like the middle of the movie, and I thought that was the projector, but it was actually the movie. So when it abruptly stopped at the end, I was like, oh no, the projector went out again, and then the credits started rolling. I was like, oh. So it definitely fooled me, but I would give First Reformed an A-, and that heavy minus is definitely due in part to the antagonist of the film, but I loved it quite a bit. I cannot wait for Joel to watch it, because that's our main review that we're going to talk about again. And I might take a back seat a little bit on that show, and I'll let Joel kind of express his feelings, but I think this is definitely one of my favorites. But once again, Joel and I have been discussing this for the past 5 days. This has been one of the hardest, kind of like, you know, hey, what was your favorite of the festival? It's like, oh, most of them were. So if you had to whittle it down to like a top 3 or top 5, it's hard as hell. But First Reform, A- for me, and that was my first official day and the third official day of the festival. Now, Joel, we can finally jump in together now. We from this point on, we have seen every movie together, and so Joel, would you like to introduce, you know, all the movies that we saw on Sunday?
Yeah, sure. Sunday was another 4-movie day for Chase, and my only 4-movie day.
and Joel almost died after this day. By the way, I had to bring him back to life several times.
Yeah, it was crazy. So, and that's just, you know, that's the adventure. It's part of the adventure. So, exactly. Our first movie was something called Zama, which actually has been out for a few weeks in limited markets. I think it came out on the 13th, like in, you know, small cities like New York and LA. But it just kind of is coming around to other markets, and they snapped it up for the festival, which is a great way to kind of put it out there. And I also reviewed it on my website this weekend. Because it doesn't have a Dallas release date, I decided that I wanted to go ahead and get the review out there for, you know, if it ever opens here. So it's called Zama, and it comes from director Lucrecia Martel, who is kind of a big name in world cinema. She has done a few movies that I've not seen, including The Holy Girl and The Holy. Maybe it's, I can't remember. Anyway, something. The Headless Woman. That's what it is. The Holy Girl and The Headless Woman. Both movies that I've been really interested in finding, although I can't for some reason. It's just they're hard to find. This one is an adaptation of the Antonio Di Benedetto novel, and it follows Don Diego de Zama, who is kind of a functionary of the crown. This is in 1700s Argentina, when imperialism is at its most intense, or, you know, for the most part is at its most intense. And you know, we have kind of a glimpse at a couple of different economic states here, because we have the ones who kind of exist in privilege and wealth that, you know, are able to use, for instance, slaves as the engine for in-house, like, ceiling fans, essentially. And then you also have the people who live in squalor, who have to huddle together in huts, and So it's partly a really compelling and kind of bleak portrait of that, but it's also a kind of an absurd comedy where we have the main character, Don Diego de Zama, who is essentially a slave himself. He's a functionary of the crown, and he looks down upon all the slaves. But there's this, but he's also a womanizer. He is kind of vying for the attention of this woman named Luciana, played by a great Lola Duenas, and also has birthed an illegitimate child with one of the poor natives. Kind of gives him a bad image. And just kind of various other things. He's a womanizer, but he's kind of hopeless in his attempts to woo Luciana. The movie kind of chronicles his attempts to investigate and defeat a mysterious figure known as Vicuña Porto, who kind of lurks around until the end of the movie, kind of lurks around the proceedings a bit and causes some havoc, and it all ends with a big battle. And it's a really weird movie that you got to be on the wavelength for. I'll let Chase tell you all whether or not he fully was, but I was. It's kind of like my thing, I guess. And I just felt like the precision of the filmmaking was really compelling too. And I thought that the script was really sharp in its examination of these people. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of those things where the tone and the treatment kind of alienate certain viewers. But for me, it was just a really exciting challenge. And I very much enjoyed this. So I think I'd give it a solid B+. That's my grade for that one. And then Chase isn't quite as positive on it as I am. So take it away, Chase.
This is out of all the ones we've seen, this is probably the biggest disagreement that we have. However, I can acknowledge the positive aspects about this film. Joel nailed it correctly. The filmmaking in this is so precise and so symmetrical and vibrant with color and framing. It's a very technically perfect movie where like the DP, the director, production designer, and art direction and costumes, they all work together so fluently to where it comes across as like that is so perfect in every way, shape, or form. Where it falls apart is what Joel said, the wavelength. It didn't really connect to me on a story front or even the absurdism, which I can fully acknowledge because it does play out as a dry comedy in some aspects.
Very, very, very,
yes,
very
very,
dry.
very dry. We're talking like sandpaper that's been dried out by the sun dry. But I can acknowledge that technically it's a well-shot movie. It's well acted. The costuming and the production design is so elegant and it matches the time frame beautifully. I thought the music was quite well done. It honestly just falls down to the story for me. And I told Joel this, and I'll tell you guys this. The movie's almost 2 hours long, and I never got into it. I honestly sat there, and I will be completely frank with you. I did fall asleep for 5 minutes, but Joel did wake me up and did his due diligence.
And it was the only time you fell asleep.
I know,
proud.
It was the only time I fell asleep throughout the festival, and it was only 5 minutes worth. But I listen, I like abstract film making. David Lynch is one of my favorites. I love me some Cronenberg. Terrence Malick even does it sometimes. I like out there type of movies. It's just throughout the entire 2-hour runtime, I really never got into it. Character-wise, story-wise, it just never hooked me on that emotional level or even a dryly comedic level to where I could appreciate and want to watch this again. I know it's really high for Joel, and it could possibly sneak up there at the end of the year for him. But for me, the technical aspects definitely outweigh the story and the emotions and the characters. So I would give it a B- just because everything else is so well done. It would pain me if I dip this movie to a C just because I know they put so much time and effort behind the camera.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it's pretty high up there in the year for me. The only problem in terms of maybe it not making my top 10 is that I'm going to have to see it again, and I don't know how I'm going to do that because it doesn't have a Dallas release date, and I'm going to suspect that in the States, especially in Texas, the home video release is going to be minimal.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I'm going to see it again unless I get my hands on a screener, which those did not go out very well either. So I remember asking around a little bit, and nobody could find out where to find an online screener. So anyway, I'll have to see it again at some point. I do look forward to that. Our next movie is is Chase's least favorite of the entire festival. I'm just kidding.
That is a damn lie.
No, this is a really terrific. This is kind of when the the first great movie at the festival came about. Zama was a highlight, but this movie, man, I'm telling you. All right, it's Three Identical Strangers. This one is a documentary from director Tim Wardle, who chronicles the story that actually was pretty famous, even though I didn't know about it, but a little bit before my time.
That just shows you how young Joel and I are.
Yeah, I mean, this was a little bit before our time where we would have known this, but it follows. Plus, it all kind of mostly happened in 1980, so. But it follows these three men. The first one, a guy named Bobby, is going to school at a community college in New York and gets mistaken for another person by that person's roommate. How that happened is worthy of a documentary itself, honestly, that coincidence. But in any case, he's confused for another person who says, "Dude, you have a twin brother." And so he seeks him out, finds him, and then they kind of become famous. They get their picture taken, and a third man who looks exactly like them says, "Hey, you guys look exactly like me." And it turns out that these three people are triplets separated at birth. And so they become this big news item. They're featured on a bunch of talk shows, and that is the least weird part of this movie. Which I'm not going to talk about in any other way, and I think that that Chase pretty much did the same thing with his review, that there's so much going on here that essentially it's impossible to reveal anything. But what Wardle does is he basically takes a documentary and he works a bunch of other genres into it, so that you have this kind of caper almost about how trying to figure out the answer to a riddle kind of at the movie's center, which is how did they get separated and what's the secret here, what's going on behind the scenes. And the parents of these men also have those same questions. And so it's really, really tense and interesting, and the editing is fabulous. The style is, kind of traditional, I suppose. There are a lot of talking heads, but the way they use the talking heads is a little different than usual. And so I don't know if it's fully traditional. Basically, they use the talking heads to build tension rather than to just tell us facts, which is something like with Dark Money. That's generally what they did. But with this one, they're using various talking heads to build a narrative and tell a story by matching a lot of archival footage and reenactments. And so it just really all comes together in this package that is mesmerizing to watch. And so yeah, I mean, this one's an A. You guys know how harsh I am on giving movies A's. I'm going to be giving a bunch of movies in this festival an A, and this is the first one of those. So of those, I think 5 movies, honestly, 5 movies at this festival. So yeah, pretty much a solid A. It's absolutely one of the best. I think I put it at number 3 or 4. So overall, so yeah, it's pretty terrific. Chase, take it away, because I know you love this movie.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. The one thing I really enjoyed about it the most is that it was able to kind of have this black cauldron effect of like so many different genres thrown in there, stirred around, and it came out into this like cohesive, energetic, super emotionally charged type of documentary that I didn't even expect. Now, Joel's correct. what we just told you with the whole triplet thing, that's within the first 10 minutes. After that, it gets so batshit crazy that I was sitting there going, there's no way this is real. This is playing out like a fictional narrative. There's no way this is real. And then when the movie is over with, you sit back, and not only are you shocked by everything you just heard, but you have to keep reminding yourself that was a documentary. But that just goes to show you what Tim Wardle did with the overall direction, really kind of hooking you in with this premise and keeping you hooked throughout the entire runtime with revelation after revelation, and it just keeps going deeper down this rabbit hole that you're just kind of in awe by not only the storytelling, but the utilization of the talking heads and the reenactment shots, and the archive footage, and of course the overall flow of it and the editing of the film. Another thing I really liked was the music. I thought the music was it got really, really cheerful when it needed to be, really energetic when it needed to be, and then really horrific when the events were happening on screen that were also horrific. It kind of got under my skin, and it was some really nice kind of nerve-crushing, soul-sucking type of horror soundtrack that I really just found as a nice touch, because they could have easily gone with like a generic kind of sound bed underneath the timeline that they were editing with, but I'm just so glad that they went basically in accordance to whatever the genre was that they're mimicking, and that music kind of translated with whatever genre they had. So it's one of my favorites. I'm with Joel. Documentaries are a little hard for me to give A pluses rather than narratives, and that's only because I need to watch them again. And it's the same thing with narratives. It's like I was telling you guys, and I told Joel, you know it in your gut. If it's like an A plus movie, it's going to go down as one of the best in history. But if we're talking about in terms of the documentary genre, it's one of the best for sure. And so A for me.
Very nice. All right, so our next one, I'm going to have to fully admit, I expected, and I even went into this movie thinking that I would fall asleep. But I'm telling you, it was to the point where I was like, I told Chase, I said, if I fall asleep during this movie, just don't wake me up.
Don't wake me.
And I did this again with the movie later on in the week, but
yep.
I have just conditioned myself not to fall asleep in movies. I think it's just something like, I'll maybe dip in and out, and I'll still retain every single bit of information. But I'm glad that I didn't, though, because this one was a pretty solid one. It's called Sammy Davis Jr. I've Gotta Be Me, and it's actually from the American Masters series on PBS, or it's backed by them. I don't know if it was produced by them, but I think that they picked it up somewhere. In any case, it basically sounds like what the title says. It is a biography of Sammy Davis Jr., who, aside from, being part of the Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Paul, I forgot all their names. Anyway,
that's
whatever.
Okay, Joel. That was decades before we even existed.
Right. The members of the Rat Pack in the olden days. He was also a very interesting political figure. He also had a pretty intense life, so that we get, obviously most prominently was an entertainer, and was an entertainer for basically his entire life. We see near the end that he takes part in a benefit of it in his honor just a few weeks before his death, and he's tap dancing. And then we hear that at the age of 3, he was winning competitions. He was an entertainer for his entire life, and he was also a very complicated figure. He had a lot of problems with faithfulness in marriage, and we don't really mean cheating on women. We mean remaining faithful in the marriage, like in terms of commitment. He was always out and about at different other places. Really didn't have the mindset to settle down. So we get a lot of a portrait into that. We get a portrait into how much of an activist he was. He was hanging out with James Baldwin and Martin Luther King Jr. at the front lines of the civil rights movement, including walking in the Selma March, which I did not know anywhere else. I don't think anything else has ever told me that. Which might have been nice before that. Maybe I missed it somewhere. Obviously, I don't study the civil rights movement. I probably would have known this before that. But if I did. But in any case, it's very traditional. It's going to play on PBS, and it plays like it's going to play on PBS. It's, same thing with Dark Money. It's kind of just a lot of talking heads, people talking about his legacy, archival footage of him talking on talk shows. We hear some stories about how he lost an eye that literally popped out of his head in a car crash. We hear about how that affected him for the next couple of years because he had to recalibrate everything. We just hear a lot of very illuminating stuff in an entertaining and engaging way, and so kind of an easy one to say that I'd give a B. And so yeah, it's a round on the level of Dark Money. These two kind of tied for me in terms of the pretty good docs that we saw, and so a B is my grade for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm same. We discussed it afterwards where, after watching Three Identical Strangers and me watching Won't You Be My Neighbor, I was just like, it was good. I think the one thing that kind of held it back a little bit is because it probably will air on TV is that it did feel like an episodic TV documentary rather than a cinematic documentary. Yeah. It's not like an inherent problem, but it is something to point out just because
it isn't not experimental. It isn't really stretching. It's chops in any way. It's just kind of doing its job in a crowd pleasing kind of fashion.
Well, I mean, I mean, you're totally correct, and it's just one of those things to where when you have a documentary play in a theater versus TV, they're going to be structured differently, and you need to adapt to that particular medium. And so that's my only quibble with it is that it does. I mean, it literally breaks it up into sections. I mean, it does it in such a TV manner where I was like, okay, like this is getting very formulaic now. But what it does well is, like Joel said, highlight this guy's life, show that he was an entertainer, singer, tap dancer, activist, how he got his eye popped out, everything about it. And it was so fascinating because I had nothing of knowledge about this guy. I knew of him, but I didn't know that much of him, and just knowing that much of him makes me appreciate him even more. Even though he was a flawed human being, he was still one of the best entertainers in history, and I can't deny that. And I thought the overall editing style of the transitions and using the kind of graphics to tie the sections together and then to edit in between certain segments within the sections, I thought was really well done, really kind of colorful and vibrant, and really just kind of keeps the movie going in a very energetic form. And of course the archival footage is nothing short of spectacular. I mean, they even get footage from the 30s. Like that's insane to me. So solid look into this man's life that I didn't know about, flawed or not, still a good human being in my book. So I give this one a B as well.
Yeah, and also I just want to say that the ability to call a bunch of interviewees is also something that documentaries are, should be judged for, even if it's like in a casual way. And They get everybody from like Whoopi Goldberg to Donald Rumsfeld for this thing, and it's crazy. So, really, really solid little doc. Guys, the last one from Sunday, man, it's one of my favorites. It's Hearts Beat Loud. This one comes from director Brett Haley, whose previous two movies, I'll See You in My Dreams and The Hero, I have not seen, but I do want to see them now. This one stars Nick Offerman as Nick Offerman and Kiersey Clemons as a father and daughter pair. The mother and wife of the family died several years ago in a freak biking accident, and they kind of have this, a bit of a strained relationship, kind of, although they do have this regular get-together kind of collaboration called a jam sesh that they do together, and one of those turns out to be fairly productive, and a song comes out of it. And so Offerman's character decides to put it on a streaming service, and it starts playing in restaurants that use that streaming service, and he's super excited about that. So it basically becomes a trigger for them to spend time together. And it's just, this movie is one of those really, really like confident, crowd-pleasing entertainments that is heartwarming, heartfelt. It's occasionally heart-wrenching. There's a few there's a few events in this movie that are very, kind of hard to swallow in such an otherwise kind of happy entertainment, and it just shows the range of the movie to be able to confront a lot of that stuff, and but it doesn't use it as like blatant melodrama. I thought that it was very maybe not naturalistic. That would be the wrong way to put it, but it's very organic. It plays out as very organic. Everything feels of a piece with the rest of it, and the performances, particularly Offerman's, are all terrific. He's this is a great performance by him, like genuinely great, and Kiersey Clemons is really good. You have good supporting work from Blythe Danner, who plays Offerman's mother. You have Toni Collette, who plays his landlady, who might become something more over the course of the story. Sasha Lane stars as a young girl that the Kiersey Clemons character is interested in. And then you also have, her story, which is, that she's obviously already out to her father. She's also trying to get into medical school. That's her dream currently. And so the movie is wise enough that it doesn't, just kind of end with the expected notes of, I think that it's kind of hard to talk about this without giving anything away, but essentially it could have gone, in a certain direction where, it regresses on her character, but it doesn't do that. It's wise enough to allow her her dream, and I think that is a really good sign. So, the filmmaking is solid. It's kind of good TV show level, I guess, something like 30 Rock or whatever. In terms of the cinematography, it's not really stretching. But it's not a movie about the filmmaking. It's about the characters. It's about the writing. And I think that those things are top notch, and so I easily give this one an A. This is another of the A grades. I think that this is a real gem. So that's my grade for Hearts Beat Loud. It opens on June 8th in limited release and kind of rolls out after that. And its production distribution company, Gunpowder and Sky, is a real up and comer. I've seen I think a couple of their movies, and they really know how to pick them. And this is just the latest one, so I'm hoping that it takes off. I think that it could be one of those hits along the lines of like Sing Street, and because it's in that mode, it uses music in an equally vivid way. So that is my grade for Hearts Beat Loud.
Yeah, I like the movie quite a bit. I'm not as high on it as Joel is. My grade's not like that much lower, but I mean it's because Joel's like on the love line, I'm on the like line, which is perfectly fine. But what I really appreciated about it the most was not its technical aspects, because Joel is correct. It's very standard, very basic type of cinematography and type of overall visual punch to it. It's standard stuff, but that's not important. If it's competently made, I can excuse it if the other aspects about it are stronger. And the characters and the writing is where this movie's pun intended heart is, and that's what actually beats the loudest. And yes, pun intended again.
Oh boy,
the music is the kind of backdrop to the relationship between Nick Offerman and Kiersey Clemons, and the music is the one thing that kind of bring them together and really kind of communicate with one another, because they do live by themselves. Their mother is no longer in the picture, and that is a lot of kind of weight on both of them, and so they don't ever since that accident they just they communicate and stuff, but there is some friction there. But what's so beautiful about that relationship, it's so organic, is that music does bring them together. The music is very toe tapping, very kind of rhythmic, just addicting, where it's just like, yeah, you can get into this music quite a bit. So the music itself is really well to listen to. The performances are really great. It's subtle work. It's nothing like over the top. But I think Joel nailed the most important thing about the film is, and it's not just because Sasha Lane is in it and she redeems herself for American Honey, but
you sir,
you knew I was going to do that. You knew I was going to do that, so just accept it. But the most important thing is what Joel pointed out to, was that at the end of the movie, could have been generic, and I would have definitely dipped my grade down even more.
Yeah, I think I actually would have too, because it honestly would have showcased a safeness.
Yeah.
A different kind of safeness than just the filmmaking. It would have been a safeness in storytelling, and I think that even if it was just down to like an A- or something, I think it would have really hurt the movie if they made that one decision, and I'm really glad that they didn't do that. I'm really glad that they didn't go with the easy, safe, emotional beat. They decided to go with the more realistic, character-driven one.
Correct.
And because we're dealing with a character in the Kiersey Clearman in Sam, that's her name in the movie. We're dealing with a character who's a true original, and I love that. So yeah, go ahead.
That's what's so great about it, is that they set up that choice at the beginning of the movie, and they followed through with it. They could have easily went off the rails and like, oh, we're going to do this differently because of what Nick Offerman said. It's like, no.
Yeah, this now becomes her dream, but that's not what happens in real life. A lot, you have sometimes maybe something like comes along and you didn't expect it, and it really just connects with you in a way that your previous dream didn't. Yeah, I mean that can happen. But more realistically, it's not going to be so quick, because this is like maybe a week or two, something like that. And I don't think that in that period of time, it's
because that's a huge life changing decision if she went the other way. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're right. With the given time frame, that makes total sense with her character to just follow the dream that she wanted to do in the first place.
Plus, and I think it's actually a clever thing to do this. We don't get a whole big sense of how much the first thing is her dream. The medical studies are her dream, and because it's such it's such a compact story in terms of the time frame. So there's clearly elements at work that we don't see that lead her to believe that to her choice. So it's just a great moment. And I love that. So, and also I wanted to mention the music, more of it. The music is great. We get 3 songs that they make together, and they're all terrific.
Yeah.
And I think that any of them should be up for consideration at the Oscars. So yeah, definitely an A.
What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I was going to say I totally agree. Definitely the Academy, please listen out for this one, and why don't you do this movie a service that you didn't do to Sing Street?
Right.
So stupid. I'm still angry about that, by the way, but I would give this movie a B+. I still recommend it highly. I know Joel loves it a little bit more than I do, but I think if you can get the consensus from both of us is that we both tell you to where if you like music, if you like father-daughter relationship movies, if you like just nice sweet little like family type of movies, this is definitely one for you.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so then we took a break on Monday
because Joel was dead.
Yeah, I was dead. I watched The Mask again with for the first time in more than 10 years with Chase, and
which was great.
Yeah, and then we kind of took it into Tuesday, and I'll let Chase introduce these two. Would you want to?
Yes. Yeah. So
this was the best day of the festival, by the way.
Yeah. So get ready for this. If you think the first movie that we're about to talk about is great and like we're going to gush about it, you're going to hear Joel lose his mind on the second one, and it's a documentary. Yes. So Tuesday was a bit of a late start. Just to give you guys a little precursor, that we saw There's Something About Mary and Liar Liar, which, by the way, Joel had never seen There's Something About Mary ever.
I'm a terrible person, but luckily now I've redeemed that. It's a great movie. I love that movie.
So I'm glad that Joel finally got caught up with the '90s.
One of the funniest movies I think I've ever seen, and I watched the extended edition for those curious. So
I'm glad that I was able to expose once again other great comedies to him, because that's been my role in his life so far. I'm glad I can make some positive impact. Anyways. We saw our first one, and it was The Miseducation of Cameron Post. Now, this one is directed by, Joel's going to help me if I mispronounce it again, Desiree Akhavan?
Akhavan, yes.
Akhavan. Anyways, she directs it. She's also one of the writers, and this one focuses on a story set in 1993 where a teenage girl played by Chloe Grace Moretz, who is Cameron Post, by the way, she is caught by her boyfriend basically having sex in the back of a car. with a woman, and so the boyfriend, starts spreading that around, and so does the girl, and then her aunt actually sends her to a gay conversion therapy camp, and that's where our story picks up, and we see her interact with the other camp members, some of the staff, which one of them is played by John Gallagher Jr., or becoming friends with, Sasha Lane. She pops up again. And so we kind of see that, and we kind of see what is going to happen with her. Is she going to conform and try to, quote-unquote, fix herself, or is she going to actually be true to herself and, do the right thing and hopefully get out of that madness and start her life fresh and be her true self? I got to tell you, this is another great movie. I was telling Joel this, and I honestly think this is the truth. I haven't seen Chloe Grace Moretz in anything since Kick-Ass 2, and that was 5 years ago. So it was very refreshing to see her in this one, to really kind of tackle not only a story that's relevant of today in the discrimination that the LGBTQ community faces, especially in 2018 still. It was nice to see her give a very subtle, kind of authentic performance that I didn't really see coming, because as the movie kind of starts off, she's kind of shy. She's not, like, hey, how's it going? But as the movie kind of progresses, we get to see her character not only break down and be vulnerable, but also be strong towards the end and confront teachers and stuff. So it's a nice little arc that she has. I really enjoyed John Gallagher Jr. As one of the camp counselors, if you will. He was really well done. A lot of pain behind his eyes. And that is the running theme of most of the characters in this movie. A lot of the campers, when they're discussing how they were fixed by God and all this stuff, you can see them kind of quiver in their eyes a little bit and in their voice. Like, you can definitely tell that they're not fully immersed into religion and God and whatnot, and they are so hurt by the fact that they can't be themselves that it pains them, and it also pains me as an audience member, which is really effective on an emotional core throughout the film. It's a well shot movie. I think it's visually pleasing. It's very, very pleasant. I think the structure of the film is very nice and really kind of takes you in and out of different elements of humor and drama, and even some really dark subject matter that's like psychologically just insane to know that these camp counselors can, as Cameron Post says in the movie, emotionally abuse these kids. And so it does kind of weave it out on different tones, but it still stays along that same line to where you can watch this and be like, oh, they're acting like, teenagers. They're acting like, how teenagers would. They curse sometimes. They're kind of rebels. They go off and maybe smoke or go walk through the woods. And then we also see kind of the rebelliousness in these teenagers and standing up for what is right, and really kind of seeing the psychological damage that can kind of be a part of these people if they're brainwashed enough. And I thought the actual relationships there in the film are very genuine. The chemistry is there. I felt like with her and the group of friends that she's friends with, I felt like they were friends. I thought all the sexual encounters that she had were very almost like really raw and emotional, and they didn't feel like they were Hollywoodized. They felt like they were like real things happening on screen, and it's not meant to be sexy or like in a pervy way. It's meant to show the kind of explosion of sexual energy that these kids have that they're being repressed on, and it brought a tear to my eye because it's just beautiful to watch, to know that when they break down and they go after their urges, that they are just kind of just being who they are, and that's who they are, and they're not trying to be something that they're not. So it's an emotional ride for sure. I would give it a solid A. I don't really have any inherent problems with it because I think it was just a really well done movie, Joel. I mean, it's and Joel, would you like to explain before you get into your review, like who sat next to us and why that was important as well?
Oh yeah, so one of the sponsors was a local resource center for LGBTQ youth who invited a bunch of the students, the youth that they cater to the screening, and I'm telling you, there was laughter, crying from a couple of them I saw, um, you know, just real engagement with the story. I think that this is going to be a movement when it comes out. I really hope that that the rumors are not true, that it doesn't have a really terrible release platform for August. From what I'm hearing, it's not going to be properly in theaters. It's mostly going to be on VOD, which I really hope doesn't happen because stories like this are important to get out there. I'm really hoping that somebody like chips in some sort of like I don't know, funding at the last second. In any case, if you can find it on VOD and watch it, however you watch it in August. I think it lands on VOD on August 3rd. So this is a great movie. I think that you had made the comparison of The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is really apt in terms not in terms of subject matter so much, although there is a gay element to the story in Perks. It's not really similar, I guess, but it's in the same
more
milieu.
tonally and more accurate to
yes,
like a teenager's life, where like one moment you could be joking around, and the next moment you could be so devastated that you're crying because no one can help you, type of deal. So.
Yeah, they're very similarly kind of and also the cinematography is similar in both of them. There's a lot of seemingly lantern lit scenes, a lot of kind of amber lit scenes. It's really interesting visually. I thought it surprised me in that way. It's a great movie. I was completely shocked and surprised by this one. It's certainly one of my favorites. Moret's performance is something else. There's so much emotional terrain traveled by her in that role. And I thought that there was really good support. Jennifer Ely has a role as the camp leader who is we never really learned anything about her life, but she's clearly kind of repressing a lot herself in certain ways. And then John Gallagher Jr., as you said, great performance from him as this guy who clearly has convinced himself that he's been fixed, but there are moments where you can tell that he's really struggling to reconcile a lot of that. And then Sasha Lane, again, was interesting. We kind of inadvertently saw 2 movies in a row with her in it, in a supporting role, and she's really good here as Jane Fonda, which may or may not be her real name, and probably isn't. Somebody even says that.
That was fantastic. Is that really her name? I don't know.
I don't know. She could be lying. She's probably lying. Anyway, great. And speaking of which, that person who said that, Emily Skeggs, I think, plays a person here named oh gosh. I forgot the characters. Anyway, you have to understand, we saw a bunch of movies this week.
Yeah, our brain is fried, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, pretty much. She's really good, and then just good, really terrific performances all around. It's a heck of a story. It covers a lot of emotional terrain, like I said, much like Moret's performance. The story does too, and it does it in a way that doesn't push. It's not trying to jerk your tears in a sanctimonious way. It's just telling the story, and you can take from it what you will. You can have the reaction to it, how you will, and yeah, it's terrific. I'd also give it an A. I'm telling you.
It's I'm telling you, this festival just like
3 in a row. These 3 in a row are all A's. So let's just say that.
So you just heard Joel like highly praise this one, right? All right, so. Yeah. This is actually Joel's favorite one that I'm about to introduce. And I forgot to mention my favorite one was 3 Identical Strangers. So that was a documentary. Joel's favorite is a documentary even above 8th grade, because that is on the roster, by the way. So get this. This next one that we saw was Generation Wealth. And now this one's directed by Lauren Greenfield. And she kind of focuses on the excess type of greed-like culture that we live in, and how obsessive some people can be for wealth, status, and power, and really kind of just focuses on different aspects of people in many different regions and different job titles that people have. What she does is that she gets a lot of research, whether she focuses on former porn stars or former hedge fund managers or Wall Street people, people that used to be obsessive with money when they were kids, and now when they're older they're not. It is a wide range of research that she did for this to really kind of capture the horror and just the sheer gut punch that greed can take of hold of someone, and just how disgusting some people can be. And even then, they'll have somewhat redemption towards the end of the movie. It's just a really kind of epically told, almost in the same line as Three Identical Strangers, not really weaving in and out of genres per se, but more of this kind of like epic storytelling structure that's set in a documentary form. So I guess just to give my quick thoughts on it, because I want Joel to talk about it the most, is that it's a wonderful documentary, like I said, really excessive, because that's the theme, excessive in its research, really obsessive with Lauren Greenfield getting everything that she needs, so that obsession is also tied into the themes of obsession with money. The interviewees were really well handled, really well structured, because this is a lot of material to kind of handle. It's decades worth, so I give props to all the editing team to put this together, because that would have caused me a headache. If you thought Avengers Infinity War was a headache to put together, this would have probably been second place. There's just a lot going on, but it's able to weave in and out so fluidly that I forgot that I was watching like 40 different people talk. It was just edited in such a way to where I didn't care, because I was so engrossed into it. And I actually remember people's names and faces, even though we focused on a lot of them. I was like, okay, that's the lady from that scene, that's the guy from that scene. So well handled, very horrific to watch sometimes, and she really does not hold any punches. This movie definitely earns that R rating, even to a point where there was one scene where I'm actually allowed that the MPA allowed it in there. And Joel knows what I'm talking about. It deals with a porn scene. Now, it is edited in a way to where they don't show anything, but the implications and the aftermath of one of the porn scenes was, I mean, I don't mind like when movies kind of go the limit. Hell, I've seen Shame in theaters, and that was NC-17. But there was something about, since this is a documentary and this is real people in real life, it really kind of affects you to know that some people can go down to the bottom like that just for that kind of wealth and status, and it's really sad to see. And that's kind of what she wants you to feel, Lauren Greenfield, as the director. But also, it's not just a pure American horror story. There's also redemption, because there are, I think, like 3 or 4 core characters throughout the documentary that at first you're like, what are they doing with their life? Like, they're just so obsessed with money, and then towards the end of it, they actually have arcs. You actually see the human side to them, and she breaks through to them. So Lauren Greenfield, which ironically she is also featured in the documentary as one of the key players, and her parents and her kids, she's able to show you that look what greed can do to people, but also look what they can kind of take out of that situation and redeem themselves with. And it's such epic storytelling, like I said. I give it a solid A as well. It's just, Joel, they keep throwing great ones at us. Like, I don't get it.
It's insane. I adore this movie. So, is it maybe a little shapeless to start? Sure. Is there maybe too much, but with too much in quotes, content for the movie? Sure.
You can make an argument that there is too much in this movie.
Yeah, they maybe she maybe tackles a little too much for a single movie that's 106 minutes. But none of it matters if it works, and it works like gangbusters here. And I think that I always constantly think, what would Siskel and or Ebert love, in recent times? And I think that this in particular would have absolutely delighted both of them. Siskel more so, because he was all about, what movies show you the range of kind of human behavior and emotion in a way that is uh, epic, kind of in a scope sense, rather not length. It doesn't have to be length. It just has to challenge you the most. What movies, what kind of storytelling excites you the most in its treatment and and all of that. It's this movie. I think that he would have loved it because as you said, everything about this thing is all about the excess in a way that both comments on the subjects of the movie, and there are many of them. Um, I couldn't even tell about all of them in my written review because there's so many of them. Um, but it's also a way for Greenfield to reflect on her own work. I had seen her documentary, The Queen of Versailles, a few years ago, and that was another one that was really a fascinating examination of these kinds of themes of excess and the privilege of wealth and the consequences of it after a while. What happens when bubbles burst economically, and what happens when credit runs out, or when scandals drop or whatever in the case of the porn star. And it is just fascinating. I was absolutely glued to the screen. I would describe it this way: it was 106 minutes, and in every like good sense of this sentence that I can mean, it felt much, much longer. It felt like I had been taken on a journey that was, I honestly felt like, and again, I mean this in a good way. It felt like I had been in the theater for 4 hours because I'd seen this story with all of these arcs that, yeah, I mean, sure, there are a couple of avenues that the movie doesn't quite go down enough. Some of the kids that she revisits, we see them in the old footage, then we don't see them in the new footage that she shoots, of them now. But we do follow a couple of them, and it's really interesting to see them now. It doesn't quite examine those lives as much as I thought it should, but I think that's less to do with the filmmaking than more to do with how much there is to talk about. Because part of the point of the movie is that she's found out to some degree that she dabbles in this material a lot in her filmmaking. This idea of again, literally generational wealth and excess. The fact that a lot of people who in the Reagan era, there's a boom for money after the U.S. left the gold standard, and so money was just printed in the Reagan years. And now we're reaping the disadvantages of that in our society today, because there's so much that relies on money in a capitalistic society, but there's not a lot that's making that money for people. And so it's all about that conflict, and I just love that she was able to so thoroughly examine this topic in this documentary, not only for the benefit of us, but for kind of a therapy for her in a certain way. And I just adore this movie. And so yeah, it's an A for me. It's very close to an A plus, honestly. Because I honestly can't think of anything that's wrong with it that I had a problem with. Obviously, a little bit of overreach here and there, but again, it doesn't matter if the overall product is this good.
I think it's a time capsule documentary. Like, this is going to play very well in the future. Like,
Yes.
when people look back on our history, like, this is a perfect documentary to kind of lay out to people, like, oh yeah, here is this section in time, and hopefully it's changed in the future.
Yeah.
But here's this section in time where people were acting like idiots for money, and it's like, yep.
I just really hope that at some point it all becomes Star Trek, where they don't rely on wealth or money or anything, because that's part of the point of that show is we all went into space and then we realized how stupid money was, and then maybe they can look back at this like, wow, I'm really happy we got past that, because man, anyway, whatever the case, it's a powerful piece of work. And then that leads into our last day at the festival, which was Wednesday, and we saw three movies. The first one was a movie called On Her Shoulders, and this was a light comedic. I'm just kidding, it wasn't. It's a documentary about Nadia Murad Basitaha, who more prominently just goes by Nadia Murad. She was a seamstress in the Yazda region of Iraq, where it's basically set up like hundreds of feet in the air near a mountain, kind of isolated from the other parts of Iraq. And ISIS decides to use it as a stronghold and to try to take it. And for a while they had it. They actually had control of that region. And but during the period of time where they were trying to vie for control, they went in, killed a bunch of people, raped several, a lot of the women and children, including Nadia herself, who was then sold into sexual slavery for ISIS, and basically escaped several months, I think, into that imprisonment. In I believe it was like August 3rd, 2014 was the initial attack. I'm not entirely sure when she escaped. I'm pretty sure it was sometime in 2015. And then her story kind of caught the attention of the media, and now she is a Goodwill ambassador with the United Nations after giving a series of impassioned speeches and standing up for the rights of, or for the, well, not really rights, I guess, for the release of the other people who are imprisoned there. And so the filmmaker, what was her name? On Her Shoulders. Alexandria Bombach follows her around in the immediate aftermath of her kind of coming into the spotlight. So we get a bit of an insight into kind of her mindset about fame. She doesn't like any of it. She didn't want any of it. This is not why she escaped to become this person in the spotlight, but she's going to use the platform if she has it. And I thought that was really a moving idea. And it's a pretty solid documentary, as a documentary in terms of the visual components. It's, same thing with kind of Dark Money and Sammy Davis Jr. It's not exactly stretching itself beyond telling the story. It uses a lot of like home video cameras and stuff, but it's an effective story, and it's an effective telling of the story through her perspective, or at least through what we can guess is her perspective. There's obviously a lot that she's still repressing. She gives off the persona of somebody who is completely emotionally and mentally exhausted with life. Her smile even kind of has that weariness to it that, is obviously somebody who's seen some stuff, been through some stuff. And in any case, it's pretty good. So I would give this one a B. I think it's a well told story. So that was our first of our movies on Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's just like with the Sammy Davis Jr. I think it's a very solid look into this woman's life and like what she's had to go through. And I'm glad that like some things are moving in motion. I'm not saying everything has been fixed yet, but things are moving in motion, hopefully, to where we can, try to abolish, these types of leaders that are running these cults of madness and, terrorizing, towns and stuff like that. It's disgusting. But I'm glad that even through the horrible stuff that she had to go through, I'm glad that she was able to come out and be a voice for her community and that religion, because I know that, they do not have a voice, and so now she doesn't want to be, but she is now the kind of spokesperson for that religion, and I'm just glad that she's able to kind of get out there, especially in front of like the UN and stuff. So the emotional components of the story and the overall story is interesting, and I think it's a very solid look into it. My issue with the film is that, and this is because I went to film school, so obviously I'm going to have some type of say in this, but the director, Alexander Bombach, she was also the DP and the editor. I have no problem with that. If you want to jug around many positions, that's fine. However, since she was running around half the time doing most of the stuff by herself, she had to have a light camera. and her camera of choice was a DSLR camera. So basically, like those ones you would see like from Canon or Nikon, where you can hold and take some really great pictures, but if you flip it over to the video part, you can actually film video on those cameras. Here is the problem, though: when you film videos through that camera, it does not have a cinematic quality. It has a very high-res internet quality, which is fine if you want to upload it to the internet. The problem is it doesn't have any motion blur, so it just looks like this high-def image of real life, and it doesn't come across as something you could throw on a theater screen. And I've worked with these cameras before, and when you have something in focus and you have like maybe the background out of focus and your subject's in the foreground, if you move that camera ever so slightly, your camera has to adjust, and it might make the subject a little blurry while it's trying to catch up and stuff. And so it doesn't have like this fluent type of filmmaking. It's always having to keep up with the filmmaking of the cinematographer, and it shouldn't have to do that. It should be an easy tool for you to use and not something that is fighting against you. And so it doesn't have this kind of like epic motion blur, type of 24 frames per second quality. It has more of a blown out internet quality, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But if you want to display this in a theater, it needs to have a different look to it. And that's, once again, going back to my problems with the Sammy Davis thing, it felt like a TV documentary. This feels like an internet documentary. But overall, I think solid work from a directive standpoint, which is something the next film is lacking. A directive standpoint, an emotional standpoint, all that works, and it does kind of trump the lack of filmmaking and pushing the visuals, but I will say it's a solid one. I give it a B as well.
Yeah, and speaking of the next one, if On Her Shoulders kind of reminded you of somebody making a movie for high-speed internet, this one looks like it was made on dial-up. It's called
Zing!
It's the Stinker Guys, the dog, the turkey. It's the worst film at the festival, and it's a documentary. It's called The Blessing. This one actually has an interesting premise. So basically, there's a Navajo reservation that has kind of exists in the shadow of a mountain that has $100 billion worth of coal or something hidden in its reserves, and an American corporation has basically kind of bought the mountain out, intends to mine it, and there's a lot of pushback for that. But who we follow is a family who's of Navajo heritage, including the father Lawrence, and he actually works for the corporation, kind of doing grunt work. And so the movie basically follows them as they do stuff. So he has a daughter. She kind of has a secret. I don't want to give that away. It does lead to the best scene in the movie, but essentially, if you can guess by me saying this, that basically she wants to play for the varsity football team, but she's also voted homecoming queen. If you can kind of thread the points there, you could probably figure out what I'm saying. And she keeps her hair cropped short, so there's an identity, element there that's interesting, just not really explored in any way. It's a 76-minute movie, including trailers, including credits. But basically, the movie, purports to be about this conflict with the coal mine, but it only spends about 20 or 25 minutes on that, and the other parts of the movie are spent following this family around with a camera and only using the ambient light that surrounds the people. So what? Anyway, it's bad. It's directionless. It's really dull. This is another one where I told Chase, if I fall asleep in this one, don't wake me up. And I'm shocked that I didn't, but I think it just goes back to how I just have conditioned myself not to. Otherwise, if I hadn't, I would have slept through this whole thing. That's how It's told with no urgency whatsoever. Everything moves at a sluggish pace, even for basically being just an hour. It's so slow. I kept looking over at Chase, and it was the most annoyed look I think I've ever seen on your face. Or
That's
maybe
because
not
I
annoyed.
was annoyed.
Maybe less annoyed than disinterested. It was the most disengaged, disinterested look I think I've ever seen on your face in person. And I'm telling you, it was warranted. I was sitting there scratching my head, and there was applause at the end. I mean, I get that there's usually applause at these things, but it's so weird. And then I glanced over at somebody as they were marking their ballot, because for some of these movies, if they're in competition, we get ballots, and for others we don't because they're not. But I glanced over, and somebody gave it a 5, and I just have to think.
What?
Yeah, I know. I just have to think, like, these are the audiences that give things A for effort. Maybe it's because they're at this prestigious event, this film festival, they have to like everything, which, okay, I get. And honestly, like, we can't really argue against, liking everything, since we literally liked the last, however many movies that we talked about and loved most of them. But be a little critical, because it's a documentary that doesn't know, the directors. There's 2 of them, Hunter Robert Baker and Jordan Fine, who don't know how to even do basic shot setup, and they really don't know how to tell the story. Supposedly it took 5 years to make, and I don't understand how or why, unless they're including the time for research, and if they are, then they barely used any of that research that they did, or they just didn't have the budget, to make it all. In which case, whatever. But they should. That's sort of secondary to my issues. It's not only about formal precision. It's just basic filmmaking is not competent, and I just did not like this movie at all. I'm a little less negative on it than I was when I immediately came out of it. I was honestly close to an F when I came out of it, but I'd give it a D, and I'm pretty sure that that's the same rating for you, Chase, right?
Yeah, I give it a D as well. It's only because out of the botched nighttime cinematography, some of the shots were fine. And it's like, okay, that's all I can take away from it, because there were 2 things that I gathered from this movie. 1, it's terrible. And 2, Joel came up with the greatest T-shirt ever, because in his blurb on Twitter, he called it directionless twaddle, which means I want to put that on a T-shirt that says, I am directionless twaddle, and I would totally wear that around. Because that's exactly what this is. This movie does not know what it wants to be. We have directors that want to focus on the coal mining and, disturbing this tribe and what. That's fine. But they don't even go that route. They bring it up a little bit in the beginning, and they kind of weave this family in and out of this situation, because it's a complex situation where this father has had this coal mining company come and interrupt their community and their home life, but he has to go work for them. That's great conflict. But they don't even explore that, because they set this up as, okay, we're going to focus on the coal mining. Okay, we're going to focus on the family. Let's focus on the family and the family. Oh, let's go back and have a fact about the coal mining. Family. Let's have a little backstory on the father that was actually really interesting. Oh, that's interesting to you? Let's move on. Family, end. Like, yeah. You can't tell me that's a competent movie. For its 75-minute runtime, it's ironic, because it works as a 3-hour-long bore fest, and it, like Joel said, it barely humps over that hour mark. So, like, what the hell were you thinking? There's nothing interesting about it. The directors didn't know where to go. If you wanted to make it an environmentalist piece, I don't care. Just have a directive. Have a point of interest. You are making a documentary. Also have charismatic subjects, because exactly
the daughter is clearly repressing a lot, which means she isn't emoting a lot. She's kind of closed off. And then the father just kind of putters around his house. He doesn't seem to go out anywhere. He he just kind of does his thing, and he always says the words at the end of every sentence,
Yeah,
something that I
exactly.
noticed.
He's like, hey, I really hate working for this coal mining company. It's really not that cool, but I got to support my family. Oops, I broke my back. 2 scenes later, oh, my back's fixed. The movie's over. What? Like, that's how the movie was.
It's just not interesting. It's not an interesting family. Maybe there's an interesting family connected to this that they could have followed. I don't know. It's just
I can't fix it. Like,
yeah.
usually when we walk out of movies, like, Joel has seen enough movies to know how to fix a movie. I've been to school for this, and I've seen a lot. So we can kind of, like, if a movie's bad, like, for instance, the most recent one that we've seen that's been terrible was Truth or Dare, where we can look at that and go, okay, the premise is interesting. Maybe we can fix it up like this. I honestly don't know how you could redeem this movie. It's one of those documentaries to where you need to do more research, and you need to completely overhaul this and start over.
Yeah, it's almost pretty much completely a lost cause, and it's bad. So yeah, D from both of us, which leads us into our last movie. That is Eighth Grade. This is the feature debut of Bo Burnham, who's a former YouTube personality, and he has created a story about a YouTube personality. Her name
right?
her name is Kayla. She's played by the impeccable Elsie Fisher, who's, in addition to being terrific in this movie, is also a delightful Twitter follow. So go do that at Elsie K Fisher. Plug. Anyway, I'm telling you, just delightfulness all around. In any case, the story, such as it is, basically follows her through the last, I think, about maybe a week or two of eighth grade, right before she goes into high school, and basically, she's just kind of struggling with the horrors of eighth grade, which is a pretty terrible year. My personal worst school year was ninth grade, just because of the events that took place and my mindset and all that. It was just bad, but eighth grade certainly is no treasure. It's a really uncertain period of time. You're at your most, let's just say, your most puberty in terms of hormones. Physically speaking, there's a lot of that's the time of acne. Let's just say, it's just awkward, and it has received a movie that is every bit as awkward and really funny. It's just a gem, and so basically, this is if my favorite movie was not Generation Wealth, it would be this one, because I'm pretty sure that this is probably my second favorite of the festival. So. It really just lives or dies on Fisher's performance, I think, because and the character of Kayla, because let's face it, Chase, this movie could have gone horribly wrong. It could have had this kind of passive protagonist who just observes everything, doesn't really take part in it, and then things just kind of happen to her, and she's there to react to them. And it's kind of half true, almost unintentionally, because she's very shy around other people. She's introverted by nature, it seems, and but she's if she maintains in one of her little YouTube videos that's supposed to be kind of self-help themed. She's every bit as talkative and lively as anybody else. She just doesn't approach people herself. She kind of waits for other people to approach her. And so, which is honestly kind of true of me at that age. So, it's such a great performance because, particularly during the videos, because you have Kayla kind of stuttering and stumbling over a lot of the points that she makes in those videos. They're kind of wry and wise in a certain way, but they're also naive because she's only in eighth grade. She's maybe had one experience, and then she makes a video about the broader points of that experience, and there is a wisdom there for others her age. But of course, in hindsight, we look back and it's kind of amusingly naive in a very endearing way. And her favorite word in any given sentence is the word "like." Let's just say, she's one of those who talks kind of like that. The millennial speak, if you will. And so yeah, it's just this very sweet, awkward, really, really funny. Like I don't want to downplay, it's a very heartfelt movie, but it's one of the funniest movies of the year too. And you have a lot of flourishes where like she's nursing this this crush on this kid named Aiden, and every time she claps eyes on him, this pounding synth-heavy score pops in. Anna Meredith, shout out. This is probably the best score of the year, or one of them. It's either this or Isle of Dogs, because it's a great score. It's sort of a mixture of the score, and it's also you got some soundtrack in there too. There's an Enya song that's used in the trailer that's featured in the movie that's really great called Orinoco Flow that I've been listening to on repeat since seeing the movie. It's great. Chase, do you know what song I'm talking about? Maybe?
I'm not as inclined to the music scene as I am the movie scene.
Okay. Sail Away, Sail Away, Sail Away.
Oh,
that thing.
yeah.
Yeah, it's called Orinoco Flow, and it's a great song. It's by Enya, and this is the version that they use is a remastered version from 2009. Great song, and anyway, but you also have the score that's just pounding, very, very synth, heavy. A lot of electronic beats there, and it's great stuff. And then you have great support from Josh Hamilton as her dad, Mark, who
Yes.
Yes, he gets I just like to call it this because it's kind of the standard right now. He gets a Michael Stuhlbarg moment.
Yes.
In a certain way, and by that I mean Michael Stuhlbarg in Call Me by Your Name. There's an ending scene that really, like, his performance is really good up until that point, but I think it comes into full view with that scene. It's a great scene of generous compassion. And I love it. I don't want to give away anything about that scene, but it's beautiful, and he performs it brilliantly. And the various kids are a lot of fun. And because you had also she gets a senior visit or a high school visit day where she gets to hang out with the senior. And then you have like a juxtaposition to the fun time she has with them with this other kid that hangs out with the senior that she's paired with. Where a car ride becomes really uncomfortable, and you get that kind of the it's kind of, I guess, called rape culture, a bit of a view into that kind of scene, with honesty. It doesn't feel gratuitous or exploitive. It feels honest, and it's just a terrific. I basically titled my review, and it wasn't meant to be like a put down of either movie. It was more meant to be kind of a reference to the kind of wording that I think it would have received by someone within her contemporary group. What if Lady Bird but younger? Is kind of the vibe that I got here, because it's somebody trying to discover who she is, where she is in her life, in her surroundings, and the people, within the view of the people around her. For instance, she's trying to befriend the really popular girl in the school, Kennedy. I forgot who plays her, but anyway, this girl named Kennedy, but who's always mean to her, and so she's just kind of navigating the last steps of 8th grade before she can't reconcile them anymore. Before she moves on to a very, kind of a different kind of precarious moment in her life, these 4 years that lead to college. And it just all lives or dies on Fisher's performance, and she is just amazing. If she is not nominated by the Academy at the end of the year, they know nothing. They don't know anything about performances. Well, okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but seriously, if there's any kind of performance that is worthy of Academy attention, it's this one. Please nominate her if anybody's listening. Please consider her. Please watch this movie when it comes out in July. It comes out, I think, July 13th or 6th or something, and then it goes into wider release patterns after that. And it's just a great, great movie. I had a terrific time with it. I mean, there's moments of heart-wrenching truth, but the biggest takeaway is how relatable and funny it all is, and it's very, very funny. So I would give 8th grade a solid A as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, there's three things that I took away from this. One, the kid that plays Aiden is Ty Sheridan Jr., and you cannot convince me otherwise. The second
his
thing,
clone.
Yeah, it's really scary on how
it's really frightening. I thought it was him at first, and I was like, wait,
so
what?
I was like, wait a minute, he looks younger in this. Second thing, if you want to know how Joel and I were in high school, there's a kid named the character Gabe, totally us.
Yes.
If you want to know how awkward and nerdy we were, it's that kid. He pretty much encapsulates what we were both like growing up. I thought it was nice because I was like, yeah, that's how we were. And third, it's just this movie's fantastic. The thing that this movie relies on is Elsie Fisher and her performance and really kind of portraying that awkward, teenage stage in her life, where she's about to go into high school and, she's a kid that wants to be involved with social media and other people's lives and giving other people's lives like tips and information while she can't really understand how to, grow her own life. And, that's the one thing I really appreciate about Bo Burnham is that, just like I put in my tweet, I felt like he didn't even write this movie. Like, he basically just followed kids around and just had them be kids. So that was great for the authenticity. But the second thing was to really adapt this type of story of growing up and coming of age set in the technology, social media heavy realm, because I hate to break it to you guys, but when Joel and I were growing up, the only thing we had was MySpace. Facebook didn't even come about until we were in high school. And so this era, this generation that's behind us, they're growing up with all this. So it was interesting to see that little small touch to kind of have social media kind of cut through everything, because that is what kids are going through nowadays. So Elsie Fisher, great job kind of portraying that awkward teenager while also still being outgoing in certain aspects in her life and just really kind of encompassing what it was like being a teenager. Her father, Josh Hamilton, knocked it out of the park. He was super lovable as soon as he came on screen, and every single time he kind of popped in and talked to his daughter, I just had a huge smile on my face because he just seemed like the greatest dad in the world. And then, of course, that scene at the end will just break you because he's just a father that sees so much greatness in his daughter, even though she can't see it herself, and he really, kind of pushes her towards that, and that just so beautifully written and just directed and just so delightful. And like Joel said, it's a very funny movie, even with its serious stuff that kind of goes throughout it. It's still a movie that relies on humor and its awkwardness, because when people are awkward at that age, they don't think that they're funny, but to us as older people, we think it's pretty funny because we're like, wow, that's really like kind of awkward and ridiculous because we used to do all that stuff.
It's it's sort of like the empathetic recognition,
yeah, exactly,
of our former selves and how that was just a completely different time,
and how we as youth were just awful.
And it even addresses that. There's I don't want to reveal how they're used, but there's time capsules in this movie that kind of very much immediately ties into that, and it ends on that note too, and it's really moving, and it's
great stuff, man. If I had to say who the two biggest players are, it's Bo Burnham and Elsie Fisher. They're the absolute driving forces in front and behind the camera, and I really hope when this comes out, it's from A24, so they knocked it out of the park again with this and First Reformed from the festival. But yes, once it comes out, please go see it. I think it's going to hopefully have that Lady Bird momentum going into award season. And of course it's premature right now because it's only May, and Joel and I still have several months of movies to watch. But as of right now, it's one of the strongest of the year for sure, and I give it a solid A as well. Yeah,
it was great, and it capped off a terrific festival.
Yes.
That was pretty much it. So kind of a recap of my grades: D+ for Edge of the World, C+ for Life is a Bitch, C+ for The Guilty, B for Dark Money, B+ for Zama, A for Three Identical Strangers, B for Sammy Davis Jr., I've Gotta Be Me, an A 3 times in a row for Hearts Beat Loud, The Miseducation of Cameron Post, and Generation Wealth. Solid B for On Her Shoulders. And I don't know why I said soldiers. My brain's fried, guys. A D for The Blessing, and an A for 8th Grade. So, yeah, really strong festival.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, all of our grades are pretty much similar except for a few changes here and there. Dark Money, B, Won't You Be My Neighbor, A, Woman Walks Ahead, a C+, First Reformed, A-, Zama, B-, Three Identical Strangers, A, Sammy Davis Jr., B, Hearts Beat Loud, B+ for me. Miseducation of Cameron Post, A. Generation Wealth, A. On Her Shoulders, B. The Blessing, D. A big old fat D. I just want to emphasize that. And then, of course, 8th grade, a solid A. So what about you guys? Are there any of these that you've been looking forward to, or, did we help you out in terms of which ones you want to see in the future now, if you were having any trepidations or whatever? So hopefully we helped that out. And this is actually a great segue into our social media plugs, because you can actually see our full in-depth reviews with all of these movies on Joel's site and on my YouTube channel. And speaking of that, Joel, where can the lovely people find you online?
So you can find my writing on joelonfilm.com. I just wanted to say again, because I don't know, I don't publish these reviews on my website, but yet I do have one though, and that's Zama, because it had opened already. So you can read that now on my website. If you want to read my full reviews, go to dallasmoviescreenings.com. For those, at my own website, though, I also reviewed Let the Sunshine In, which is the new Claire Denis film with Juliette Binoche. It was okay. And then by the time most people listen to this, there should be reviews up of that I caught up with Nostalgia, which is a drama with John Hamm, Catherine Keener, a bunch of other people, including Nick Offerman. And then also Peter Rabbit, which was the family film from this past February. You'll get to see reviews for those pretty soon. And then you can follow me on Twitter at RealJoelCopling. That's ReelJoelCopling. And then, on Letterboxd at J Copling, I've got all my ratings for the movies that I saw. I don't have reviews, of course, but I have my ratings for the movies that I saw at the festival, and I've got a ranked list that everybody can check out there. So, that's pretty much where I am right now.
Yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at RealChaselee. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can get up to dates on when I post these things. I post them all throughout the week. And, of course, I got other ones coming up. And speaking of that, I have seen Deadpool 2, and that is actually a great segue into next week's show, episode 231. We're going to be going over Deadpool 2 as the main review. And, Joel, do you have any mini reviews you're doing next week?
I don't think so. I think I'll just leave it to Deadpool 2 for next week. And I might do the same thing for Solo the week after that.
Okay.
We'll
at least you guys know for the next 2 weeks. But next week for 231 is Deadpool 2. I have seen it, and can't wait to talk about it. I want to see if it actually converts Joel into a believer this time, or if he's going to be lukewarm on it again. So, we will find out. So, we will see you guys next week for another episode of Real Me and Cole, a movie podcast. Please remember to spread this around and let people know this is the definitive movie podcast, because if you sat through this entire movie podcast and you're not a movie fan, well, hopefully we convinced you to be one. That's Joel over there. I'm Chase. We will see you guys next week. It's Deadpool 2, chimichangas, and the F word, and dick and fart jokes. It's going to be fantastic. And all the links in the description will be below, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.